Isotope Data on the Hyksos. From the article at journal.plos.org, Who Were the Hyksos? Challenging Traditional Narratives Using Strontium Isotope Analysis of Human Remains from Ancient Egypt. Introduction. A foreign dynasty, known as the Hyksos, ruled parts of Egypt between circa 1638 to 1530 BCE. Their origins are thought to be rooted in the Near East, which is supported by architectural features and grave accoutrements of Tel el-Dabca. In this former Hyksos capital in the Eastern Nile Delta, burial culture is characterized by a blend of Egyptian and Near Eastern elements. However, investigations are still ongoing as to where the Hyksos came from and how they rose to power. The narrative of how the Hyksos 15th dynasty of ancient Egypt rose to rule is apocryphal. The Ptolemaic priest Manetho was for centuries the only account of their rise, rule, and fall. Living approximately 12 centuries after the Hyksos dynasty, Manetho described the Hyksos rulers as leading an invading force, sweeping in from the northeast and conquering the northeastern Nile Delta during the Second Intermediate Period, in a time when Egypt as a country was vulnerable. Manetho's account only survived in the works of later historians such as Flavius Josephus, and, however biased and unreliable, was the solitary known source of the Hyksos for centuries. Even after the decipherment of hieroglyphs, sources for the Hyksos rulers remained scarce and unreliable due to the ancient Egyptian stately customs of censorship and propaganda. Hyksos became a part of the topoi depicting disorder and chaos, whose ritual killing was the pharaoh's way to maintain order and legitimize power. Western scholars further entangled the origins of the Hyksos with race-based science, mired in imperialism and Orientalism, conflating the Hyksos rulers to represent an entire ethnic group that further confused pursuits to investigate the origins of the 15th dynasty rulers. During this paper, we only refer to the dynastic rulers as the Hyksos, not the elite attendant to the rulers, nor that ethnic group with which they are associated. With the discovery of the ancient Hyksos capital at the archaeological site of Tel el-Dabca, and 5 decades of excavation including several cemetery sites, an opportunity arises to investigate the circumstances in which the Hyksos rose to rule. The last decades of research have produced evidence clearly pointing toward a Near Eastern origin of the ruling class known as the Hyksos, notably borne out by shared non-Egyptian features of ceramic types, burial customs, adornment, weapons, as well as domestic and cultic architecture, though not the foreign elite arriving directly from foreign lands, as Manetho recounted, but people of non-Egyptian ethnicity who were born and raised in the Delta. To date, no tomb known to belong to a Hyksos ruler has been excavated, but this wealth of new material and insights allows direct comparison with the Levant and the wider Near East in a significant step forward toward explaining cultural trends and geographic provenance of people associated with the Hyksos and the background of their migration into the northeastern Nile Delta. The archaeological evidence also does not support Manetho's narrative of the Hyksos as leading an invading force sweeping in from the northeast to rule as Egypt's first foreign dynasty. Instead, it is suggested that those who became Hyksos rulers were descended from Asiatics who had been living in Egypt for generations. The site of Tel el-Dabca. The examination of individuals buried in the cemeteries of Tel el-Dabca offers the opportunity to directly assess the origins of these residents and assess questions relating to timing and mechanisms of the Hyksos's rise to rule. The site, located in the northeastern Nile Delta, has revealed a stratigraphy extending over a 500-year period. This settlement was founded in the 12th dynasty and was known from the 13th dynasty onwards as Hut-Waret. During the Middle Kingdom, this city was an administrative center and a harbor city that grew in power to finally become the capital of the regional Hyksos kingdom. Then known as Avaris, various peoples and groups from both near and far negotiated their concepts of life, religion, technology, politics, and power in this harbor hub. The city was later largely abandoned after around 1550 BCE, following the campaigns of the southern Theban kingdom, the 17th dynasty, in its pursuit to defeat the Hyksos rulers and forge the new kingdom. Although a palace complex in the nearby site of Esbet Helmi, dating to the early 18th dynasty, shows a certain continuity within this area. The research questions. As the cemeteries in Tel el-Dabca hold individuals interred before and during Hyksos rule, this paper addresses 3 questions related to the influx movement of the people interred at Tel el-Dabca. 1. Is there a chronological pattern to the movement, i.e., is there markedly more influx into Tel el-Dabca during the 12th dynasty or during the 15th dynasty? 2. Are there any sex-based patterns in movement? 3. Can the origins of non-locals be confidently provenanced? Questions 1 and 2 address the issues surrounding the Hyksos origin and mechanisms of rise to rule. An influx of foreigners during Hyksos rule at the city that would become the Hyksos capital would lend some strength to the idea of an invading force. A larger influx of male non-locals would also lend support to this concept. Stable economic power might open up opportunities for whole families to move into the Nile Delta and settle. In this instance, gender parity in non-locals might be expected. Question 3 investigates the potential origin of the non-locals at Tel el-Dabca to address what is perhaps the greatest question around the 15th dynasty. Where did the Hyksos come from? Strontium isotope analysis in Egypt. Strontium isotope analysis of human tissues provides insight into residential mobility and origin on the individual level, allowing extrapolations into large-scale socio-political dynamics. Multiple paleomobility studies have utilized strontium on human dental enamel to identify non-locals in Egyptian and Sudanese contexts along the Nile Valley, although none have been conducted on humans from the Nile Delta region. Interpretation of strontium isotope analysis rests on the assumption that an individual's body tissues will reflect the strontium values of the underlying geology in which they lived when these tissues were forming. The individuals sampled were excavated from 3 areas of the site. We will need to first test whether the 2 areas with larger sample sizes are displaying significantly different strontium values as groups before combining to test for sex and time period. Results. When plotted against the local strontium values, more than half of all individuals, 40 of 75, or 53%, from Tel el-Dabca, spent their childhood outside the Nile Delta. There are no significant differences between the excavation areas, and so they are combined to compare time periods and the sexes. Those individuals outside the local range display a wide range of values both above and below the Nile Delta range. There were significant differences in the strontium values for pre-Hyksos and Hyksos individuals, with more immigrants during the pre-Hyksos time periods. There were also significant differences between the sexes, where more females are non-locals compared to males. When plotting isotope values by both time period and sex, we see some clusters of non-local women from the Hyksos period, 5 with higher than local values and 2 with the lowest values in the assemblage. Discussion. given that the Nile River is the main water source for drinking and watering crops through ancient Nubia and Egypt. The strontium values for the majority of these ancient populations would fit close to the local range of Tel el-Dabca. Individuals who grew up along the Nile, where alluvium creates a corridor of homogeneous strontium values, likely show values too similar to differentiate between, for example, Upper and Lower Egypt. As such, non-locals south of the northeastern Nile Delta would show the same strontium values as locals to the region of study. Individuals from major centers such as Memphis, Thebes, and even further south into Upper Egypt and Nubia might be present in this assemblage, but unidentifiable using strontium isotope analysis. The Hyksos-era women, clustering higher and lower than the local biospheric values, are interred at different tombs across the site. It is possible that women hailed from the same origins in this time, but this might be an issue of equifinality, in that they have childhood residences in different parts of the world with similar underlying geologies. Oxygen-stable isotope analysis is an additional tool for investigating paleomobility in a bioarchaeological context, and has been used in previous Egyptian and Sudanese studies. Future research utilizing oxygen-stable isotope analysis on the Tel el-Dabca assemblage might hold promise for identifying these non-locals with local strontium values. Despite a reasonable expectation of isotopic homogeneity, the majority of individuals in the larger assemblage, irrespective of time period, show non-local strontium values, which is compelling. Chronological patterns of movement can be observed using strontium analysis on human remains from the site of Tel el-Dabca, with more immigrants previous to the Hyksos dynasty. On a local scale, this reflects in some way the international characteristic of the city as a harbor in the northeastern Nile Delta. In combination with previous archaeological evidence, this research supports the concept that the Hyksos were not an invading force occupying this city and the upper Nile Delta, but an internal group of people who gained power in a system with which they were already familiar. Contrary to the model of the Hyksos coming to power from a foreign invasion, we did not find more males moving into the region. Gender parity would have been expected, with families moving as economic opportunities arose, but instead, we find a sex bias towards females. The greater proportion of non-local females compared to males could fit with patrolocality in Egypt and the Near East, but this rather high proportion of 77% of females as non-local deserves more careful contextual consideration. The excavated cemeteries and domestic burials are assumed to be more representative of the elites of the city rather than the common population, and it is possible that these women are coming to the region for marriages, cementing alliances with powerful families from beyond the Nile. During the Middle Kingdom and Second Intermediate Period, there is more documentation of men with Egyptian names marrying women with non-Egyptian names than vice versa. This attitude towards marriage to foreign families continues into the 18th dynasty. Foreign women could marry into high-status Egyptian families, but Egyptian women would not marry foreign kings. It would be interesting if the technological and cultural transmission of the Hyksos dynasty on later Egyptian culture could be viewed through the lens of gender theory to explore this potential contribution from the influx of immigrant women, if the collection analyzed in this paper is indeed representative of the larger migration patterns. Conclusions. Isotope analysis is a powerful tool for exploring past mobility and identifying non-locals. However, exploring the origin of non-locals using this method is much more difficult. The wide range of values in the Tel el-Dabca assemblage suggests that non-locals, either before or during Hyksos rule, did not come from one unified homeland, but an extensive variety of origins. This in itself is interesting, as although those who would become Hyksos rulers might have an ancestral connection with a single homeland, the northeastern Nile Delta represented a multicultural hub long before the Hyksos rule, utilizing the extensive burial areas to contribute one of the largest isotopic studies of ancient Egypt to date. This study is the first to use archaeological chemistry to directly address the origins of the enigmatic Hyksos dynasty, the first instance in which Egypt is ruled by those of foreign origin. Although the Levantine origin of these rulers is not in question due to their rulers' names, architecture, and material culture, these results challenge the classic narrative of the Hyksos as an invading force. Instead, this research supports the theory that the Hyksos rulers were not from a unified place of origin, but Western Asiatics whose ancestors moved into Egypt during the Middle Kingdom, lived there for centuries, and then rose to rule the north of Egypt.